Hey guys, and welcome back to the Wise Photographer podcast. You're tuning in to episode number 18. Today I'm sharing a really exciting interview on what could be a not so really exciting topic. Today I'm sitting down with Paige Hulse. Paige is the founder and lead attorney at The Creative Law Shop, an online resource for contract templates and business tools for creative entrepreneurs. After working as a contract litigator by day and pursuing her creative outlet of calligraphy by night, Paige recognized the need for legally sound resources for the creative business owners and began her own law firm, Paige Hulse Law, as well as the Creative Law Shop back in 2017. Now, Paige is thrilled to be able to support creatives around the world with the shop, as well as her trademark and business law services through Paige Hulse Law. I knew I wanted to bring a lawyer on to the podcast at some point. And so when I was searching around, I actually found the Creative Law Shop about 6 months ago. And there was a few things that I really loved about the shop right off the bat. The first thing was that you'll find on her site, she has an extensive collection of contracts and business tools that serve so many different types of creators, from photographers to calligraphers to life coaches, and she has all of the website legality templates as well, contracts in there as well. The next thing that you'll see when you visit either of Paige's sites is her branding. And even if you don't need any contracts at the moment, definitely head over to her website, paigehulse.com. We'll have it linked down in the show notes below, but check it out. It is so beautiful. And after meeting Paige, it fits her to a T. It's beautiful to begin with, but if you ever get the chance to meet her, that her website truly represents her, which I think is one, awesome for any entrepreneur, but two, especially for a lawyer. I think that's pretty awesome. One thing that I was really not expecting to come from this interview was how much in common me, a wedding photographer and mom of two, had with a lawyer from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I'm so thankful for this crazy, awesome platform for introducing me to such amazing and talented women from all over the world. So I will stop talking about the interview so we can finally dive into the interview. Hope you guys enjoy.
Welcome to the Wise Photographer podcast with your host, Chelsea Wise. Each week, Chelsea is bringing you the best tips and tricks to help you create a joyful, profitable, more purpose-filled photography business. Chelsea is a wife and mom of two who has built a thriving photography business in her tiny hometown in western North Dakota. Without further ado, here's your host, Chelsea Wise.
Hey guys, and welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited. We have Paige Hulse on the show today. Paige is a lawyer down in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and welcome to the show. I'm so excited for you to be on.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. I'm so excited to be here today and to get to talk about photography and all things law.
Awesome. So for anyone who doesn't know who you are and kind of what you do, can you kind of introduce yourself, give us a little bit of a background of what your career has kind of looked like?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again for having me. So like you said, I am in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Let's see if we think back. I graduated from law school in 2015. Being in Tulsa, if anybody's familiar with Oklahoma, which I know not too many people are, we are a huge oil and gas state. And so I graduated law school and I actually took a job as a litigator working in oil and gas law, which is not something I share all that often. But the reason I say that is because oil and gas law is almost exclusively contract and tort law, tort being things like negligence, defamation, slander, things that we actually do run into some in the wedding industry. And then contract law, these contracts were hundreds and sometimes even thousands of pages long and would have to be in the courtroom fighting them every single day. So it sharpens you very quickly to be adept at contracts. It was a very stressful job because, again, being a litigator, being in court all the time, your life is kind of run by the court schedule. And so I would come home as newlywed. I would come home and tried to just decompress and shed the stress of the day I fell into calligraphy. It was something that I had picked up in law school. Just as I was studying my notes, it was something that was very relaxing for me. I was a weirdo and took some of my notes for the bar exam. When I couldn't remember something like a statute very well, I would write it out in calligraphy and then I could just see it in the bar exam. So anyways, yeah, it was something that I just kind of picked up. And then once I was able to actually do it somewhat, it became, relaxing. And So yeah, that creative outlet, I picked it up in, I think right off the bat, like 2015. By 2016, it was something, my sister got married. And so I did the calligraphy for her wedding, fell in love with it was not a business at that point by any means, but just fell in love with the actual act of providing it as a service, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, behind the scenes, I had some, and again, I don't talk about this too much, but I had some really big life events going on behind the scenes. As we were speaking about a little bit earlier, I had a major health crisis in 2016. And it was one of those pivotal moments in my life that made me take a step back and kind of evaluate exactly how I wanted to spend my days. To make a very long story short, as I'm doing that introspective work at a, admittedly low point in my life, I realized that I wasn't just doing calligraphy because it was a creative outlet. I never wanted to make calligraphy a career.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing it because I loved the craft of building businesses. I come from a family of entrepreneurs. That's why I got into oil and gas. My dad has an oil company, et cetera, et cetera. And so I decided to fill what I saw as a gaping hole in the market and start working with creative entrepreneurs and wedding professionals on the legal side of things. So by 2017, I made the decision to leave the safety of that traditional law firm. I started up a law firm working exclusively for creative entrepreneurs. Nobody that I knew, no lawyers that I knew had any idea what I was talking about. They thought I'd gone crazy. They did not know what a creative was. And by the end of 2017, that business, which is Paige Hulse Law, my law firm, split into two businesses. And I have at that second business is the creative law shop. That was, again, just to fill a need in the market that was being requested quite a bit. And that is where I have turned all of the contracts that I've written for my clients into contract templates and can sell those across state lines. It's something that lawyers are very constrained by, and can provide contracts that take 10 hours at least usually to craft at the rate of like one billable hour for creatives, which I know is important for people, especially trying to get their business off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So
I love that.
Long answer to your question. I
feel like we have so many parallels between our lives.
I think so.
It's a little bit crazy. The part of North Dakota that I live in is Tioga is actually the oil capital of North Dakota. So I understand the oil and gas industry and all of that quite well. So it's kind of crazy.
It's so funny. Not something that we really run into too much in the wedding industry, is it?
No, it's not. At least not in Broadways. I mean, like for my local area, like yes, it's definitely. Exactly. But like outside, like in the internet world, no, not so much.
Exactly.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So I think I love what you're doing and what you are providing, and kind of like the why behind what you've started. Like I resonate so much with that. I think we as creatives can really feel kind of in over our heads when it comes to contracts and like the legal side of our businesses, because we tend to identify as creatives and not, business minded. Can you kind of share a little bit about what we as creatives and mainly like photographers need to know when it comes to contracts, and like what types of contracts we should have in place in our businesses?
Absolutely. I'm glad that you're starting with this question, obviously because it's vitally important, but kind of going back for a second to what you said, just it's easy to feel kind of over your head. The more people get to know me, the more you will find that I will just be straight. And so I will always say that I don't want there to be any fear. I really don't want there to be fear around the legal side of your business, or anybody listening, of course. That's the sole reason why my business exists, is to kind of strip at least some of the overwhelm and some of the kind of, not mystery, but you know what I mean, the unknowns around it. That being said, I think if anybody can take one piece of advice from this podcast, it would be, I really, really strongly advise that you find somebody in your state that at least you can call if you need to, a lawyer that you can call. I believe very strongly in every business, if you want to run it like a business, your business has to use licensed professionals. So even if you utilize a service like my template shop, for example, That's a great starting point. That's going to save you the money of a lawyer drafting that up front. However, it's vitally important that you find somebody within your state that you can go to if you have questions afterwards, et cetera. So that's one thing I want to say. Second thing I want to say before I dive into actually answering your question, Chelsea, is I should have started with this, and I apologize, I forgot. Legally, I have to provide a disclaimer before anything like this. So I'm so sorry. All I want to say is that to anybody listening, I hope this is educational. I hope that what I'm talking about today is helpful. I want you to know that it's not legal advice. And I also want you to know that this is not specific legal advice for your business. So anything that you hear today, I really want you to take it, learn from it, and then again, go find somebody within your state that can help you with that. So now that is out of the way, I will actually answer your question. So what contracts, if a photographer comes to me and they just want to do kind of like a legal audit of their business, here's what I'm looking for. I'm looking at their business from essentially contract-wise, essentially 4 different angles. One, I am going to look at their website, and I'm going to make sure that their website is legally sound. And I know that we can touch on this in greater detail later on in our conversation. But in short, what I'm looking for is a privacy policy. That's a federal law. You have to have that. We're also, I know we can talk about the GDPR later, but that's also required under the GDPR laws. Second thing I'm going to look for is the terms and conditions. Again, I will touch on that more later on. So if I'm saying that website legality is the first cornerstone that I'm looking for, the second cornerstone that I'm looking for is going to be the actual formation of the business and ensuring that you have the right contracts in place to have a stable foundation for that business, a stable formation. So what I'm looking for is if you are an LLC, I want to make sure that you have an operating agreement. Now, this is critical. This is something I have seen. This is a mistake I have seen people make that has literally costed. I have a client that it cost nearly $50,000. It was a $50,000 mistake that they made prior to hiring me to do work for them. I want to add, but they did have an operating agreement in this scenario. However, it was just some free something that they pulled online, and it, in short, did not have the correct terminology that they needed when we had to come back and restructure for tax purposes with the new tax code in 2017. Because it was missing some of the language that was required, they literally lost out on a $50,000 tax break that they could have taken advantage of.
Wow.
So operating agreements are not an exciting or I don't think anything that we're talking about legally is could be described as the fun part of business. But that operating agreement is critical. It's not spoken about that much. This is not something that is required by most states. It's not something that you have to file when you file with the state when you file for your LLC. It is in some states, but because of that, it's something that a lot of people just accidentally overlook. Again, to keep this short, the purpose of an operating agreement is it is the contract that governs your LLC. It is the contract that will specify how the business can be, how it can be grown, how members can be added, managers, how it can be wound up or restructured later on, kind of like the example I was just talking about. It also is critically important in the case of maintaining your limited liability protection. So you've probably at some point along the way heard the example that a lot of lawyers like to give of the reason why you have an LLC is to protect that business, to separate your business from your personal life. So that if for some reason, for example, you were sued, let's say you lose the judgment, let's say that the judgment is $500,000 and you say, Judge, I don't have that much money in my bank account. If you don't have an LLC, a judge will look at you and say, well, you have a house and you have a car, so you can liquidate those assets to pay for the judgment. Now, what a lot of people hear that and they think, okay, so I need to get an LLC. What they fail to think about is that you have to actually maintain some corporate formalities. So in that scenario, if you do have an LLC, but you don't have an operating agreement, a judge can do something, or the opposing counsel can do something called piercing the corporate veil. And just for the sake of your listeners, I won't get into all of that right now. I have blogs on both of my websites about it.
We'll make sure we link some of those in the episode show notes so you guys can read a little bit more in depth for sure.
Yeah, it's critically important to know. But in essence, that is what happens when opposing counsel or a judge is able to say, you have an LLC, you have not been running it accurately or in the right way. Therefore, you don't get that limited liability protection. So I can get on a soapbox, obviously, about operating agreements. I'll leave it at that for now. The third thing I'm looking for if a photography client is coming to me is their hiring. I want to make sure that they have the right agreements for any hires that they have made, whether that be an employee, whether that be a contractor, making sure that they know the difference. Second shooters, anybody like that who maybe just helps out temporarily, interns, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Just making sure that there are contracts in place for all of those people. And then the fourth component that I'm looking for, which I know is going to be the bulk of our conversation today, is those client agreements. I'm going to go through it with a very fine-tooth comb and ensure that it has all of the correct provisions in place. But I know you know this, and it goes without saying, anytime you're providing services for a client, you must have a client agreement. Mm-hmm. Critically important.
I think that was probably one of the very first things I ever did with my business was to go out and I got a template online purchased one for a contract got my wedding ones, my portrait ones, my senior ones, and all those different ones, because they definitely have different things that entail different parts of it. But yeah, that was something I was right away. I was like, I have to do this. Like, I was just reading horror stories and like Facebook groups of like, this is what happened when we didn't have that. Or, made me nervous. Yeah. But
it's crazy. Yeah, you don't think that weddings, I mean, again, I don't want it to be a fear-inducing thing, but you don't think of weddings as being high on the liability scale, but they are high dollar events, or just any photography. People are spending money and things can go wrong. So
yes, for sure.
You want to make sure you're covered.
So you're kind of talking a little bit about websites and what all we need to legally run a website. And I feel like that's kind of come a little bit more mainstream recently, understanding the legality of running a website and what goes into it. Can you kind of explain what all it is that we need as creatives to run a website legally?
Yeah, definitely. So like I mentioned earlier, the first thing I want to say is that privacy policy. This has been an FTC law, so a U.S. law, federal law for years. I off the top of my head, can't tell you when that was enacted. That's always been a federal requirement. That's something that I've seen overlooked for a long time until our good friend, the GDPR, came out. And I will come back to the GDPR in a second. That privacy policy, so again, federal law required under GDPR laws. Also recently, California they have always required separate language in privacy policies. So if you have a website and anybody from the state of California visits your site, it has to have specific language. At the time of recording this, just in the last few months, they passed new laws and require even different language. And so anyways, just making sure that you have a privacy policy that stays up to date with changing laws. Okay. If I could guess. California is just the first of many states that are going to follow in the footsteps of the GDPR. So privacy policy, it has to be visible from any point on your website. So the easiest way to go about that is to put it in your footer. That's where we've all seen it. I guess your second option would be the header, but I don't think any designer would approve of that suggestion. So speaking of the footer of your website, you also should have a copyright notice in that footer. That's just, again, the copyright symbol, your business name, and the year or the span of years that you've been in business. That's up to you. Something that I do see get confused with that is having that copyright notice in place is not the same thing as owning a registered copyright. It's equivalent. You have what's called the common law copyright, and it's equivalent to just sticking a flag in the sand and saying, "Hey, world, I'm putting you on notice that I own this website." So it helps you later on if something happens. The third thing that I'm going to be looking for is your terms and conditions. Now, unlike the privacy policy, I cannot tell you truthfully that this is a requirement. But I am very, very, very blunt with my clients that this is something I require them to have. Just like your operating agreement, just because it's not required by law does not mean that it's not going to help you or really save you from court in certain scenarios. So your terms and conditions acts as the contract that governs your website. Anybody who comes to your website just automatically by scrolling through your website is agreeing to the terms and conditions. They don't have to sign anything for it to become effective. Where this becomes important if somebody comes along and copies anything from your website. So photographers are an easy example, unfortunately, because your website is probably filled with photographs. Mm-hmm. So if somebody comes along and misappropriates or takes any of your photos, uses them as their own, etc., you would have two different ways of going after them. One would be pursuing an intellectual property claim. That's just, I won't get into it. It's more expensive, more time consuming, requires a more complicated argument on behalf of a lawyer, which means it's going to cost more. Mm-hmm. Your second way of going after them would be breach of contract, cause of action. Now, this is something that's much more simple because, again, if you have a contract, if you have a terms and conditions, it says in black and white writing that no one is allowed to take content from your website. You are able to send typically a cease and desist letter, include that language, and say, I mean, it is black and white. Yeah. So that's a much easier argument. That is, again, when I say easier, I mean quicker, cheaper. That's something that typically I tell clients to handle on their own so that they don't have to pay me for. Because that can be something that can even be handled in small claims court, for example. Okay. So that terms and conditions is a safety net.
Can you combine those two, like your privacy policy and your terms and conditions? Can those be on like the same page?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, they can be on the same page. The terms, the literal paragraphs of them cannot be combined. Yeah. Okay. You have to have, so they should have a header across the top of each of them, just showing the separation. They also need to have the date that they were last updated at the top, just so that a reader can easily, scrolling through your terms and privacy frequently, they will know when you last updated it. Okay. So, yeah, awesome. That's a great question. And they can be linked together in the footer as well.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Love that. So, for those who don't know what the GDPR is, can you kind of explain what that is a little bit for us?
I can. If anybody has heard me talk about this before, and you already know what I'm about to say, the GDPR came out on my birthday, which I thought was just cruel and unusual. It was horrible. I woke up to 780 emails from people asking questions about the GDPR. Oh. That being said, I have a plethora of blog posts and just free resources on, both of my websites about it. If you have questions following, listening to this. So the GDPR came out May 25th of 2018. This is an EU, so a European Union law. Even though it is an EU law, it applies to anybody around the world who has users from the EU accessing their websites. So if we're looking at the jurisdiction of it, you don't have to be in the EU to for this law to apply. It's just literally anybody in one of those countries getting on your website. Now, you have no way of knowing who's getting on from where. I mean, you can track it, but you don't know ahead of time who is going to get on your website from Belgium today. So anyways, it's just a safe assumption. Best practices are to assume that the GDPR applies to you. The GDPR, I read every single sentence of it. Even though it's dense, it leaves a lot open for interpretation. So I want to operate, when I talk about it, I operate from a conservative mindset, meaning I want to be overly protective with it. So if I'm speaking generally about it, it requires that if you are collecting any sort of personal information, which is defined as anything that can identify a person. So name, credit card information, email address, anything at all, you have to have certain things in place. So you have to have a privacy policy linked anywhere that you are doing that. So for example, we've already talked about having that privacy policy on your website. If you have an opt-in page, your privacy policy should be linked right there as well, because you're asking somebody to give their email address or their name to opt in. So privacy policy would be the first thing I want to say. Second thing I'll add really quickly is the GDPR required new language to be added into both privacy policies and terms and conditions. Both of those templates are updated in my shop and we give lifetime updates for those for things like this.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah, I'll kind of touch on that in a second.
Okay.
And then, the last thing I want to mention with the GDPR is they require double opt-ins. So you can't tell somebody, oh, you get this freebie, and they, and life's all great, but surprise, you're on my email list. You have to make sure that they know they're getting added to the email list and that they consent to it.
Okay.
So just all it does really, I mean, it was kind of, in my opinion, kind of overblown a bit. I think a lot of fear was drummed up in people, especially in the wedding industry in 2018. I have kind of an opinion about that. But really all it does is it requires people to be treated fairly, to be told to give their express consent if they're giving their information anywhere, so that they know exactly why it's being collected and how it will be used. It's really based on logic at the end of the day. And it's something that I think if we're all on the opposite end of it as a consumer, going onto somebody's website, that usually these are things that we want to have in place as well. So again, I have resources on both of my websites, pages upon pages of information about it.
We'll definitely make sure you link those as well. I feel like this show notes and blog posts for this episode are just going to have link after link after link.
It gets a little voluminous, but with things like this, it's hard to condense a whole law into just a couple minutes.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So I was perusing your Instagram account. I was kind of Instagram stalking you this morning. And I know I kind of mentioned it earlier that we have so many different similarities, but I have to ask about the horses and show jumping a little bit. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, happily. I am such a dork about all of this. Any of my friends listening are probably laughing right now. So yes, I grew up, I think the word horse was maybe my second or third word I ever said. I started riding when I was 4, and it's just something that I've always loved to do. And so now this is one of the beautiful things about owning my own business. And admittedly, I probably work more hours and I work harder than I did even as a litigator. But you get to choose when and how you do that. And that's just something I know that people listening can relate to. So with that, I have gotten back into riding. I started training horses when I was 15 years old, took some time off. I had some spinal fusions and things like that in college that required time out of the saddle, in law school, et cetera. And then once I started my business, it was something I was able to create time for. So anybody that looks at my Instagram will see a very thinly veiled attempt to somehow weave in my pictures of my horse with the law. That is just me. So the horse that you see on there his name is Elvis. I've had him since I was 13 and he was 4. So we have grown up together.
My horse's name is Sooner because he's from Oklahoma, actually.
That's perfect.
Yeah. He's a big old red sorrel.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just horses for me are, we all have our passions, our hobbies, being able to actually create time for that again. And I literally have it in my calendar weekly. I have my own client spot filled for myself. And that has made me a completely different human and different business owner in a good way. And so anyways, that's something that's not legal, but that's something I would recommend to anybody that owns a business.
I would have to agree, having your own little outlet or thing that is all your own and you just get to be. And I think I can definitely relate on that, horses being that aspect for me. I don't know if I've shared on the podcast before, but I'm an actual former rodeo queen, and I rodeoed all through college as well. So that was, it was never super high in the rankings, but I did. It was fun.
I think that's incredible. Did you on a college team? Or?
Yeah, Dickinson State
oh my gosh.
rodeo team. So we traveled from North Dakota to Wisconsin to South Dakota. We're the Northern Plains region.
That's incredible.
And then so we hauled ourselves. So we would travel as a team. We'd be in a group of 4. And so the first time I ever drove through Minneapolis and the Twin Cities.
Oh my gosh.
Was hauling a trailer full of
I cannot imagine.
Really expensive rodeo horses. Not even my own. I'm that's 18 years old. Everyone else is asleep. It's rush hour.
Oh my gosh. If anybody listening who's unfamiliar with the horse world, that is hard. Very hard.
Yeah. It was a little nerve-wracking for sure.
Yeah. No kidding. Oh my goodness. No, I love getting to meet other horse people. Some of us just can't outgrow it, can we?
No, we sure can't. So where can everyone find you online? We talked about your Instagram, so everyone has to go check that out and check out all the horse pictures. We'll make sure we link that. But where else can everyone find you?
Yeah, thank you. So like I said, 2 different businesses, 2 different websites. My law firm, I work with business owners. It's no longer just for creative entrepreneurs. So there I provide, and again, long answer to your question, I apologize.
No,
I provide trade formations, trademarks, estate planning, business succession planning. That's paigehulse.com, and that's Hulse. And you can find my Instagram at paige.hulse as well. My second business that I mentioned is the Creative Law Shop, and that's shopcreativelaw.com. And then the Instagram account for that is Creative Law Shop. So again, not super creative there. But the Creative Law Shop has, I think, now about 70-ish templates on it. And that's where I was working on one right before this, right before we hopped on this call, but every contract I write gets converted into a template. So yeah, and that's something, it's been a labor of love, but it's something I'm proud is out there now. So,
And you're saying earlier that they all get updated like as laws change and stuff too.
Yeah,
is
thank
that
you
right?
for asking. Yeah, so thank you for asking that. That's something that we just unveiled a couple months ago at the time of recording this. So yeah, anybody who purchases from our shop does get lifetime updates now. So when you purchase, you will automatically get added you get your own little portal. And so any template that you purchase from me, if updates are ever needed, we just automatically update them there. So you can go at your convenience and just check and download your own template when needed. The GDPR, this is something I always wanted to do. It took, as everything does in business, it took much longer than it would ever look like, from the public eye. The GDPR was the first thing that really gave me the nudge to do this, because when that happened, I don't think it's fair for people to, or at least for me, I didn't think it was fair to tell people that I'm providing a top of the line contract written by somebody who litigated contracts in court all the time, and then say, but it's only good for this year. Next year, a law might come out and wipe it out. That just didn't sit well with my integrity. And so that was something that I started thinking about then when California came out with their new laws, and I know that more are going to be coming. That was the final push, kick in the pants that I needed to get it done. So, ahead, we're mostly going to be providing updates for website templates for things like new laws coming out. Templates like our photography contract, for example, if I'm working with, and I have had this happen a few times, working with multiple different photography clients. A photographer is going to have a different perspective on the industry than me. And so sometimes I have had some photographers, like today, what I was working on, I have a photographer she feels very strongly about she's an animal rights activist, doesn't want to shoot any weddings that have, for lack of a better word, wild animals or something like that used for show. And so she wants to include an animal rights, like moral clause in her contract. That's not something I would think of.
Yeah.
I think that that's great. And so that's something that I'm going to be adding to the shop probably today. Just as if you want it, it's there as a download to include in your template.
Yeah, I love that. I don't think I've seen that from any other template shop where they're updating them. And I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
As a business owner, just to know that like the investment that I'm making now isn't just going to cover me now. It's going to cover me long term. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. It was definitely, that was one of those things that took my nights for pretty much all of the third and fourth quarter of 2019, getting off the ground. And I don't think it's something that's, I don't think every template shop needs to do it, but for myself, just the reason why I created the shop is to help people get their business off the ground. And
I think that really shows your heart behind the business. And I see that and I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
Greatly,
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's just about it. I have one last question for you.
Yes.
So I kind of got a sneak peek at some of your plants as you were plugging in your headphones. So if you could be a plant, what plant would you be? It's kind of an oddball It's a kind of an oddball question, but
I love it. Well, I'm looking over here at a struggling fiddle leaf fig, so it's not going to be that. I think I would be an olive tree.
Okay.
I say that because just to my right, I have a olive tree that is my pride and joy. For some reason, it's the only plant I can keep alive, but I think it's beautiful in all seasons. I think that it has a lot of historical meaning, and I'm a history nerd, so I love that. And I can say they can stay strong and graceful in a lot of different circumstances. So that's my answer.
I love that. It's been so interesting to listen to everyone's answers because they're all so different, and the reasons behind them, I think, really speak volumes. So
it's a fun question.
Yeah, thank you for humoring me on it. But it's been cool to see everyone's answers. But I think that is it for the interview. Did you have anything else that you wanted to share with us here today?
I do not think so. This was really fun, and I really appreciated the opportunity to get to speak with you, and hopefully something that I shared today will help some photographer out there, and that makes me really happy. So thank you for taking the time to create this podcast. I think this is a great resource for people getting their businesses off the ground.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for adding your expertise to our growing collection of information.
Absolutely. You're very welcome.
All right, guys, that's it for this episode. We will see you next week. Bye. All right, guys, how awesome was that? A huge thank you to Paige for taking the time to come on the show today. If you are in need of any type of contracts, I highly recommend checking out Creative Law Shop at shopcreativelaw.com. I also suggest checking out Paige's blog, where she's written a ton of blog posts that really break down what and why certain things are needed to be in place legally for our businesses to keep us protected. She has a really great way of just breaking it down into really simple terms. If you love today's show, I would be so honored if you could take a quick minute and leave a rating and review. It really does make a huge difference to little podcasts like this one. The more reviews we get, the further up the list we can climb and be shown to people who are searching for podcasts like this. I know it's always something that you think that you will do later, but I would be so honored if you could hit pause real quick and hop over to iTunes and leave a rating and review. Also, if you are not already a member of the Wise Photographer Podcast Insiders Group, you can join us in there over on Facebook. You can meet with other photographers and connect and get to see kind of the behind the scenes of the podcast. I also share a lot of tips and tricks and tools inside the group that I don't share anywhere else. So you are officially invited to join the Facebook Insiders Group for the Wise Photographer Podcast. All right, guys, that is it for this show. I will see you next week. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Wise Photographer Podcast. Dive into the show's notes for this episode and all past episodes at www.thewisephotographer.com. If you love the show, share it with a friend. Thanks for tuning in, you Wise Photographer, you.